thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk to us about the climate change and just the crazy jungle out there involving earth changes, basically. Really appreciate your time today.
It is a that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Don't want to learn or anything. It's terrible.
It is terrible. You know, we on our channel, I try very hard to have a non-biased approach. And it's just alarming to me, you know, when I'm the habitual fence sitter watching people bicker and argue about facts that are so blatantly obvious about just natural cycles. It's shocking to me. So,
well, it is, because mainly when you talk to them, they only want to go back 50 to 100 years.
Right.
That's all they want to talk about.
It's crazy. And there's so many pieces to the puzzle for the big picture, and we wanted to take a non-biased approach and just show people the science and the facts so they can make their own conclusions, you know, to what's going on. To me, it's hard for me not to be biased now, because I just feel like the data is so, it's staring you right in the face. You can't deny it once you look at things objectively. So on Grand Solar Minimum channel, we bring in different people. We've had John Casey on, we've had Valentina Zarkova, we've had other independent researchers on, so to have you on for your input is great. All the data sort of, it may be different, but it lines up to the same sort of time frame where society really is going to have to learn to adapt in the future.
That's certainly true, and we're already going in through changes into the next global cooling cycle. It just takes a little time to get into it, because we have never been in a cycle before where we've lived through a global warming cycle into a global cooling cycle. So we're just we don't have that much data, so we don't know how many years it takes, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, but evidence is there that the climate is now changing towards the cooling.
You watched the State of the Union with President Trump the other night?
Part of it I did, yes.
There's a lot of, he's taken a lot of criticism because he actually mentioned all the storms, but he didn't blame man-made global warming. And I found it kind of, for me, I've always been a Weather Channel kind of guy, just because some of their meteorologists I've always liked, but I found it a little odd that the Weather Channel did an article so quickly criticizing the president for not blaming man-made global warming, as if to pass this off.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I need to send you a graphic. I'm going to be doing a hurricane webinar on Tuesday, and I have a great graphic on there that I created on hurricanes, United States hurricane landfalls during the past 120 years. Landfalls and major hurricane landfalls.
Yeah, and to finish up on that point, it's what's going to be hard for me from now on is how to trust the integrity of that particular channel now, since they are clearly trying to push man-made global warming on everyone.
Oh, they are. The Weather Channel is very liberal on that.
Let's open it up here. Strongest cycle and 40 to, oh, I gotta plug my laptop in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what this shows is going back to about 1860. The blue line on top is tracking the hurricane landfalls for the United States, and the red line on the bottom is the major hurricanes. So what you see is between 1871 to about 1901, let's say 1880 or so, we had a big uptick in hurricane landfalls. Then about 70 years later, another big uptick. And now here we are 70 years later, and we're given another big uptick.
Oh, wow.
So this is natural cycles.
Right.
So what the Weather Channel, they don't do their own research. So they don't really have a clue what's going on. The National Hurricane Center doesn't have a clue what's going on either, because they don't really research cycles enough, especially natural cycles. So this is why I'm number one on the, I've been number one on the preseason hurricane predictions the past 10 years. Number one in the country.
You had a busy year last year then.
I nailed it. I predicted the hurricane for Florida, the Gulf, and Texas. I nailed it.
Nice. Well, not nice. I mean, those were bad hurricanes.
This is all natural cycles. Tracking hurricanes through natural cycles.
Right. You knew what you were looking at.
I know what I'm looking at, and these other people that are putting out the garbage, they don't know what to look at.
Is it?
That's the problem.
I think a lot of it's just politically, motivated at this point. Like a lot of people, it's hard to find the integrity in the research, without the controversy these days.
Well, I think the Weather Channel has even fired a couple of meteorologists that were questioning man-made global warming.
Wow.
And there's a lot of things out there. I'm a member of the American Meteorological Society, which is the big group for meteorologists and climatologists, and it's like the AMA for doctors. And I wanted my corporation to be a member, and they rejected it because they went on my website and looked at my views on climate change, and they rejected. They would not let my company become a member of the AMS. And I talked to someone there, and I was only second or third time in the past 50 years that a company has been rejected. You better believe that's political.
Yeah, beyond political.
They are hook, line, and sinker on man-made global warming, just like the Weather Channel. All politically driven.
Have you been attacked in other ways when it comes to censorship or just
I've
sort
been
of blacklisted?
I had the University of Maine shut down one of my talks. A conservative that got shut down at Berkeley. Now some famous meteorologists, climatologists, such as Dr. William Gray, who passed away a year or so ago from the University of Colorado. He and another famous meteorologist got shut down right at their own university. They wanted to talk on climate change, and the university shut them down. This is common. We're not allowed to speak at universities.
And it looks like to me Berkeley is not helping themselves because they get labeled as being a liberal college, and when you see a conservative get shut down because he speaks about something that's not on a liberal agenda, that to me right there, Berkeley is digging their own hole. If they don't want that label, things like that shouldn't happen.
No, it shouldn't. And when I got shut down up in Maine, I was going to speak at a can't remember the name of the place now. It's an institute up there, but they're closely connected with the university. And when we set up when I accepted to speak there, I told them, well, I want you to realize I'm going to be speaking on natural cycles. And they said, that's okay. So they had it all set up, and they advertised it for a month. Then 3 days before my talk, I noticed that 3 people from the University of Maine were on my website. The next morning, I got a letter canceling my talk.
Wow.
And they blamed it on staffing problems at the institute. Well, I went on their website, and their website was trying to reschedule another talk for that same time period.
Unreal.
And then the news media got a hold of the institute, and the president actually admitted that they were strong-armed by the University of Maine.
Strong-armed by who?
The University of Maine has a climate division. They get a lot of grant money.
So it's the grant money that they're worried about
The
losing.
grant money.
Gotcha.
They want to shut down anything that talks about natural cycles because they want to preserve their grant. They want to keep going as is. They don't want any interference at all.
And David, I think you just answered my next question, which was, why do you think the real reason is why so many deny global cooling? And it's starting to sound like money has a lot of the reason to do with it.
Well, it's all money. It's driven through the grant system, for one thing, because the grant system is driven through big power money that's pushing green energy. That's the big source of it.
Yeah.
So that trickles down to the grant system. And the grant system, when they start putting out grants, it usually stays that way for 10, 15 years when they try to attack a problem. So the only grant money available for about a 15-year period was for man-made, to try to prove man-made global warming. You could not get a grant. I have talked to a couple retired heads of science departments at universities, and they said you could not get a grant to study natural cycles. And if they knew you were trying to study natural cycles or spoke up against man-made global warming, you would either lose grants or not be able to get grants.
Oh,
So it's all money. It's the grant system pushing everything. And I spoke to a representative, U.S. representative of Congress back in December, about the time Donald Trump was elected. And I told them that one thing they need to do is take a look at overhauling the grant system.
Yeah.
That's a big problem in the grant system. Just like everything you're hearing in the news now, where they're trying to bring out information about what's happened during the past 8 years on the FBI and CIA and all this stuff.
Bad news.
There's so much corruption.
Yep. Yeah, I just find it intriguing that there's so many people that deny global cooling on a daily basis. I actually follow a meteorologist from back where I'm from in Southwest Ohio. And we had a little conversation, a friendly chat about it. And when I was trying to talk to him about the cycles and the grand solar minimum, he answered back to me and said, I just want to I'll quote one person here, it's all fake news. And it just, I know better than that. And I can't believe that's their easy way out, that nobody is willing to even talk about. Like you said, no one's willing to talk about the cycles. And that's all we're trying to talk about. We're not trying to push fear, but this is about cycles, really.
The people in the science divisions at universities cannot speak about natural cycles. They're not allowed to. And the sad part of it is, and this is what I've been told, is that to get tenure in a science department, it's publish or perish. You have to do that for 10 years to get your tenure. To get your tenure, you have to publish what your boss tells you to publish. So these young scientists are only allowed to publish papers concerning man-made global warming, because this is what the heads are told to do, told them to do. So the young people are being trained, and then pushed to only publish certain type of material. And so that's why you get a flood of papers out there just on man-made global warming. But I've noticed during the past year there's been a lot more being published on natural cycles.
Yeah.
A lot more. It's starting to turn.
Slowly. And Mari and I, on our channel, we started a little bit of a series, Global Cooling Papers, where we're trying to, and there's no really easy way to read these unless you're well educated. And so we try to read out the conclusions first and then leave the link to the paper in the description box. And that Mari and I have noticed that as well. There's a lot more available this year than there was, say, last year when we started really getting into the research of the grand solar minimum. So yeah, there is definitely, the drumbeat's getting louder. We're seeing more scientists talk about global cooling and cycles and stuff like that.
Yes, but much more. A good website for you to check out, maybe you know about it, is called the No Tricks Zone.
Oh yeah, we were on that. It's a great site.
It's out of Germany. I've been on there. They published about 10 of my things on there, I think. They just put on my hurricane press release about 5 days ago. But there's a flood of papers on there now coming out. And a lot of the papers, of course, some are published in leading journals and some are not. Some just independent research, because most of the time we're not allowed to get published.
Yeah,
the American Meteorological Society will not publish stuff on natural cycles. They will not do it. I tried to do it, and they said, not in this journal.
Wow.
That's the fascinating part. We have this section on our channel to break some of these papers down, and the point I want to drive to our viewers on the channel is a lot of this research being done on various different topics. You have people researching aspects of the sun. You have people researching planetary alignments. There's all different aspects. All these different topics that people are researching sort of come down to the same timeline breakdown. Basically, within the next 2 to 3 decades, things are going to change so drastic. It's not going to be within people's, like in modern day society's comprehension to even be able to deal with that.
Well, that's very true. Even on the cold weather this year in the United States, it didn't happen in Europe, at least not the Great Britain to a little bit east of there, but they're cooling down. They're going to have a cold February. The Arctic right now, mid-Canada, has really cooled down. We've had a strange weather pattern because of the La Nina that was in place, and because of that, we had storms going up into Alaska, pulling warm air up into Alaska, and that's been eroding the ice up there, and they haven't froze up as much as they normally would. But the La Nina is starting to fade, and Alaska is really starting to cool down now. So they're going to have some ice restoration during late January and February into March. And it takes time to cool down the oceans after a global warming cycle.
Yep.
Oceans have a big lag time as compared to air temperatures. So it takes a number of years for things to really cool down. But we're seeing the cycle starting to change now because we have this cold air that the United States had this year. And there's an article in the paper a few weeks back, they're talking about a freak 250-year cycle, the cold. They called it a freak cycle. No, that's not a freak cycle. We had this all the time during the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was common. All this means is we now have some cold air available, and it's coming back.
Yes.
And people are getting shocked about how nasty the winter has been up north. Well, we're getting back to normal. That's all it is. Now, next year, as our weather system straighten out a little bit, we won't have a La Nina. We'll have a different weather pattern, and this will spread more to Europe also next year.
Yeah, we try to tell some of our viewers that this takes time, that this is not going to be an overnight thing, because a lot of folks will comment on, some of your videos saying, well, it's hot down here in Texas, and that, nobody's saying right now we're going into a complete global shutdown. It's going to be an ice age right now, but do you follow the temperature anomaly on drroyspencer.com?
I don't know if I do that one or not.
He keeps a track of the temperature anomaly in the troposphere, and since February of 2016, it was up plus 0.88 Celsius, and as of today, it's down to plus 0.26. So it's dropped 0.62 Celsius in just 2 years. And to me, I think as far as I know, he doesn't believe in man-made global warming either. He's more of a cycles type of person as well, that global warming is just natural. It has nothing to do with man-made emissions. So, but even people who don't want to jump on the ice age bandwagon or anything still shows the work that since 2016, indeed, we are cooling, and slowly but surely, 0.3 Celsius each year isn't a lot, but over time, if it continues in that trend, like you said, we're just going back to normal. People that were alive during the 78, 79 winters, those were the normals back then. They were always cold winters in the 50s and the 60s. So
that's what I've been telling people, and just get used to it. That's what I grew up with in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Get used to it. That's what you're going to have. No, we're not going to go to an ice age. The ice age is still 30,000 years away. But we're going to be gradually getting cooler and cooler on each global warming cycle that comes every 230 years or so. From now on, each global warming cycle is not going to be as warm as the one before it. And we know that. We're back in the 800 AD to about 1100 AD. It was much warmer than today. Much warmer. And they're trying to say that we've never been this warm before. No, you just go back 1,000 to 1,200 years ago, and it's a lot warmer than today. And we had 50% less ice up in the Arctic than we did today. That's why they're uncovering so many artifacts over, you probably saw that in the news, just yesterday or a day before over, I don't know if it's Denmark or somewhere over through there in the mountains. A lot of artifacts from 1,000 years ago are being uncovered from ice melt. Well, that means there wasn't any ice there 1,100 years ago.
Right.
Artifacts had to get there, and they got covered up during the past 900 years of cold weather. Because we have a couple cycles. One comes about every 1,200 years where you really warm up greatly. Then the global warming cycles between that aren't quite as warm. Then you warm up again. Well, that's what's happened. We're on the 1,200-year cycle. We're on the warmest global warming cycle. Then the next global warming cycle, which will come in about 200 years, will not be as warm as this one, and one after that. So it just goes in cycles. But we're all getting colder and colder. But we're not going into an ice age. We're going to just go into a 70 to 120 year much colder period, more like the 1800s.
Okay, so with the data that you used to compile that data set, what exactly did you use to calculate that?
Well, what I used was cycles of the Earth, Moon, Sun alignment and gravitational cycles, and did the long-term average on the gravitational cycles. This is the cycles mainly where the strongest gravitational cycles that occur, and what we do is we get a weakening in the cycle, and every 230 years, then a stronger cycle every 230 years, or I should say it takes 230 years to go from strong cycle to weaker cycle. And so I plotted the gravitational cycles going all the way back to about 800 AD. And the long-term average lined up with the global warming cycles that come about every 220, 230 years. So that's kind of linked into this one graphic that I sent you on the pulse of warm water into the Arctic. So you can see that gravitational cycle strong. Well, that's an 18.5-year cycle from the left to right. It's 18.5 years. You can see where the cycle on the left is stronger than the cycle on the right. Then you have three weaker ones in between. The funny thing about this is the cycle over the 450,000 years looks exactly like this. It just goes out in time, that's all. Sinusoidal curve goes out in time. This is why we had, or it even goes out 1,200 years in time. This is why, if you look at this, the cycle on the left, that was the same as the temperatures back 800 to 1,200 years ago, very warm. Then each global warming cycle coming forward got cooler. And then on the right, again, we're very warm again. So this cycle, the 18-year cycle, goes out to a 1,200-year cycle, and then you could take it all the way out to about a 500,000-year cycle. They all look about the same, the sinusoidal curve on the gravitational cycles. They all line up with the long-term global warming cycles every 120,000 years, and the ones every 230 years. They just line up perfectly. And one reason we have these smaller cycles, if you go just a couple before that, one page before that, one chart before that, 9-year natural climate pulse. This is lines right up with the 9 years. The gravitational cycle, it takes 9 years from the moon to be strong in the northern hemisphere to get down to the southern hemisphere and back to the northern hemisphere. It takes 9 years. So you have a 9-year cycle. And if you look at the United States temperatures, there's a 9-year pulse on the temperature cycle in the United States, which is very intriguing.
Yeah.
You see the 1990 pulse, 2000 pulse, and 2008 pulse. These are actual gravitational cycles where the moon was high in the northern hemisphere. As I said, it takes 9 years for it to get from the southern hemisphere, about 9 years, in the northern hemisphere, high in the sky in the northern hemisphere, then it goes to the southern hemisphere, back to the northern hemisphere. It takes 9 years. So this was back in 1990. It was high in the sky, 25 degrees. See, the moon changes different in its as it revolves around, circles the Earth. It's an elliptical path, just like the Earth's elliptical path around the sun. And the elliptical path around the sun for the Earth takes about 120,000 years. That's what causes the ice ages and the warm periods. Now, on the moon changes its elevation in the sky for the peak elevation. Sometimes it will only be as high as 18 degrees in the sky. That'll be the highest point during the year. But other times it'll get up to 28 degrees. So there's a wider margin there. Anyway, this was when it was high in the sky back in 1990. Then it was high in the sky again year 2000, and then in 2008. In 1990, a very warm surge of North Atlantic water split off from the Gulf Stream and went into the Arctic. That caused the very warm, the actual beginning stages of the global warming in the 1990s. Then in 1999, a much warmer pulse of warm water surged up into the Arctic.
Now,
it was the same spot on the cycle.
Was this warm-up? Do you believe this to be caused by volcanic activity underneath?
No, this is caused by the plunging effect of the gravitational cycles.
So this is all strictly gravitational. Gotcha.
Gravitational cycles. It acts like a plunger. So that's why you have tides in the ocean twice a day. That's due to the full moon and new moon, because new moon is just about as powerful as the full moon. So you have a bulge on two sides of the Earth at the same time. And as the moon travels around the Earth, that's why it causes, when the moon goes on the backside of the Earth, you have the second high tide. So you have two high tides a year. This is plunging in the ocean, and the ocean bulges. And then when the gravitational pull relaxes, of course the bulge relaxes. So this is causing a plunging twice a day in the ocean. And then with the strong gravitational cycles, it causes a long-term type of plunge, like the one I'm showing every 9 years. When it's a very strong cycle in 1990, you had a strong cycle, then when it releases a little bit, you have a plunge into the Arctic. So some warm water plunged into the Arctic in 1990. That started the warm-up of the Arctic. The ice in the Arctic does not melt from the top down, it's from the bottom up, because it's all floating ice. There's no land. So most of it melts from the bottom up. And then in 1999, we had the warmest surge of water into the Arctic. It takes 13 years for the water to cool down once it gets into the Arctic. So that's why from 1999 up through 2010, 11 to 12 or so, it was much warmer because we had a big meltdown in the Arctic due to this very warm surge of water that was plunged into the Arctic. And then in 2008, we had, that was 8 years later, we had another plunge of warm water, not as warm, into the Arctic. And then probably we're having a plunge around 2017 or 16. I haven't seen any new information on it. There was probably another plunge, but not as cold. They get colder. They get less warm, let's say. That enables the Arctic to start cooling down. But that's what that was showing is this is what I believe causes global warming cycles. This big plunge comes about every 72 years, which means back in about the late 1920s, we had a plunge of warm air into the Arctic, and we had a real warm 10-year period in the 1930s. And then it took it about 13 years to cool down, 10 to 13 years. Then from about 1941 on, it got cold again. That 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were cold again until we got into this warm plunge again. So this is totally different than what you're hearing on the sun activity. But it kind of goes in hand. A lot of these cycles go hand in hand with the solar activity also.
That's what I feel like all the research, no matter what the topic is, when you're looking at natural cycles, it seems like they have their swings up and their swings down almost in harmony with one another. We've looked at sunspot data, tree ring data, ice core data, you know, even some planetary alignments, you know, lining up with certain natural cycles. What are your feelings with other factors like, I don't know if you've researched much about cosmic rays and their impact. Have you read any research by Jasper Kirkby in the Cloud Project?
Yeah, there's, I actually have, on my website, I have a little part of it under the, let's see, if you can go to the website.
Yeah.
You can go to Global Weather
Cycles.com, right? GlobalWeatherCycles.com.
That will get you on there.
I was looking at your site and I see you have some free ebooks available that I would like our viewers to be aware of. So thank you for putting that on your site for people as a resource.
Free to read, and they can get a lot of good information from it. Okay, under earthquake, go down where it says earthquake dynamics.
Earthquake dynamics, gotcha.
Okay. That's the, has the sun on the left and the earth over on right. Mm-hmm. And this is a lot to do with the electromagnetic storms and where they stream towards the earth. One thing that happens here, and I have it explained up, what causes a sudden shift in the mantle in earthquakes. One thing and this is what I did through researching some papers, so this is directly from the papers. There's a moon's influence on the sun's well-established geomagnetic effect, as the moon's monthly elliptical path around the Earth crosses in back of the Earth during its full moon phase. The moon enters the Earth's geomagnetic field and interrupts the geomagnetic field. And you have to remember that the inner core of the Earth is electromagnetic. It's molten. One thing that happens here, and I have it explained up, what causes a sudden shift in the mantle in earthquakes. One thing and this is what I did through researching some papers, so this is directly from the papers. There's a moon's influence on the sun's well-established geomagnetic effect, as the moon's monthly elliptical path around the Earth crosses in back of the Earth during its full moon phase. The moon enters the Earth's geomagnetic field and interrupts the geomagnetic field. And you have to remember that the inner core of the Earth is electromagnetic. It's molten iron. So it's really magnetic, and then you have the sun with the geomagnetic waves. Everything is geomagnetic, and there's a great interaction between the two. And one reason it looks like the moon is causing some effects is because when it crosses between the Earth and the sun, it interrupts that electromagnetic field. It blocks it, interrupts it. And then when it passes out of it, and then it surges again. This is why it's all interrelated. It's a lot to absorb, and I don't really understand it all myself. But this is one reason why the moon has a greater effect than what people know. It has a much greater effect. Everyone's been looking at the sun, and they need to look at the moon.
It's very interesting. I mean, there is so much data out there, and they all seem to have this cyclical nature. And, you know, it's fascinating to hear everyone's points of views because there is so much to it. I mean, we had a really interesting discussion with Valentina Zarkova and her work, and her models of the magnetic activity on the sun are showing that we could possibly plummet into a Maunder minimum situation within the next couple solar cycles.
Yeah. But you know, there's so many.
Yes, it's well, we are gonna be doing that because we're gonna be cooling down just like we were. We have a major global cooling cycle coming for the next. Well, the coldest part will be probably from about 2025 through 2065 to 2070, somewhere in there. But the next global warming cycle, we won't see weather like we do today for another 150 years or so.
And that's interesting, David, because a lot of scientists are, well, Zarkova was in agreement that in the 2030s we'd see somewhat of a stabilization again, but never return to the climate that we once knew, and you're saying 150. But either way, I think the consensus overall, is that we are definitely heading into a cooling trend, and it could last for several decades. I think that's the overall outlook of what's happening right now.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be more than several decades. Now, a lot of people are saying through about 2050. Well, the coldest part, usually when you go into a global cooling cycle, the temperatures drop pretty fast over a 5 to 15-year period. Drop very fast. And usually about 15 to 25 years into the global cooling cycle, because this is so connected with the gravitational pulses, or the gravity of the Earth is lessened and it becomes stronger. It has great influence on the inner core, the electromagnetic part of the inner core of the Earth that's all iron. That the gravitational pull actually causes a bulge in the inner core of about 1.7 kilometers. And that causes great stress on the Earth's mantle. And during this great stress, we have an increase of volcanic activity.
Yeah, you show a chart where you predict between 2028 and 2035 we will have some type of large volcanic activity. Could you explain that further?
Yes, and that's due to the increased gravitational tug on the Earth as we enter the global cooling cycle. And what I looked at is we've had about 5 global warming cycles that have ended during the past 1,000 years. On 4 out of the 5 global cooling cycles that followed, about 15 to 20, 25 years into the global cooling cycle, you had a tremendous volcanic eruption, such as Tambora in 1815, down in the Philippines. And what happens is the combination of the global cooling cycle and the great volcano causes a year of no summer. It even plunges you further into global cooling. And 1816 was a year of no summer, and it even continued almost into 1817. And because of that, they ended up having great losses in Europe as far as growing vegetables, and there was famine, and there was blight, and this was all contributed to that period. And I believe something like 1/3 of Europe perished during the next 30 years or so. And this was the global cooling cycle. And some of it's also civil unrest. You have a lack of food, you're going to have civil unrest.
Yep.
And back there, at that time, we had 1 billion people on Earth. Now we're up around 5 billion? If we have an interruption in our food chain, can you imagine the civil unrest with 5 billion people on Earth?
That's what concerns myself, Jake, and all our viewers. I mean, when you look at history, we haven't really learned from our past because I feel modern day society has taken what we have for granted, and this natural cycle that we're in, people just are, I mean, it's just alarming to me that, you know, we've taken for granted what we have and not sort of put that backbone of protection when it comes to people being more sustainable when it comes to food and all that. We just take for granted we could walk into a grocery store and have our loaf of bread. You know, most people nowadays have no clue how to even make a loaf of bread or, or hunt or gather.
And that's what's going to happen if you have a break in your food chain. All of a sudden there's going to be a lack of food. And most people can only remember what happened during the last 10, 15 years. They can't really go beyond that period. And, of course, the millennials now and all, they don't even know anything about World War II. They just don't know hard times. And it is coming. And when we go back to the gravitational cycles of the moon, and I keep stressing it, that people don't know enough about the effects of the moon. The moon has a more powerful effect on the Earth than variations of the sun, except for the long-term variation of the sun where we go into our ice ages. The moon, for example, on the cycles that I talk about, on 9-year cycles, 72-year cycles, 230-year cycles, we have changes in the gravitational pull of the moon that you can have periods where the gravitational pull is as much as 44 to 47% above the normal lunar tide. That's a huge change in the gravitational cycle, 44 to 47%. Then what I've found is when the gravitational cycle starts to relax, that's when you have your earthquakes. It's not during the strong gravitational pull. It's as the gravitational pull starts to lessen. And the reason for that is, remember I said the inner core of the Earth, the molten inner core can bulge by 1.7 kilometers, and that puts pressure on the outer core and crust of the Earth. Well, plates around the Earth actually ride on that. And if you've got a big bulge, and then all of a sudden it relaxes, that's why you get a slippage of plates and an earthquake.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there is so much with the moon that between the pulses of warm water into the ocean, and the warmest pulses come about every 72 years on a lunar cycle. So the moon, I'm saying, is a much bigger culprit to our global warming, global cooling cycles, our short-term ones, than the solar cycles.
Yeah.
Has a much bigger impact.
I mean, it seems to be all connected. There's many different theories flying around, and we have people in the community talking about the subject. A lot of people are driven to, point that we are going into an ice age, and they use the Milankovitch theory as their proof. Could you explain why that is not necessarily a reality in our lifetime?
Well, I know you can't say we're going into an ice age. An ice age lasts for about 70,000 years or so. And we just came out of the ice age about 7 to 10,000 years ago. And that was really the peak of our warm period was about 7,000 years ago, when we had 50% less ice in the Arctic than we do today. But the ice age is still 30,000 years away. What we're looking at is the short-term global warming, global cooling cycles that come every 230 years. So we're going into a global cooling cycle that's intermingled in this instead. There are so many cycles.
There are.
So this is just a global cooling cycle within the big cycle. And then another 130, 40 years now, 50 years, we'll be going back into a global warming cycle again. We're not going to an ice age. We're just going into a very cool, fairly long-term period.
And that's similar to what Valentina Zarkova was saying with her research.
Pretty much.
On the sun.
She didn't expect she expected to see cooling, not a deep ice age. And everybody's got different theories. We got people who think that the glaciation is going to start here. Once the solar wind goes down to zero, we'll see the beginning of a low glow mode of the sun. There's all kinds of different theories out there. People study on the sun, sunspots like Mari mentioned earlier. The biggest, I guess, measurement of stuff like that is the solar wind pressure has declined 30%. So I guess that's why a lot of these scientists think the sun is shutting down right now.
Well, it's shutting down in the upcoming the global cooling cycle we're entering now, but we don't have that much solar material records that go back in time. The gravitational cycles that I use, the Earth, Moon, Sun, we can research those cycles going back thousands of years. This is why I've researched it going back to 800 AD, and I plotted the cycles. It lines up exactly with the 230-year global warming, global cooling cycles.
Right.
So we could actually find out more from the lunar cycles than we can the solar cycles. And you cannot really predict the solar cycles out into the future, but you can predict the gravitational cycles out into the future.
That's fascinating.
So it's a much better field, and it's one that people are not recognizing. And we really need some federal grants to rep up here and start to see what's really happening here. But we're not talking about an ice age. I think one thing they're talking about is we had the mini ice age in the 1500s, 1600s, what they call the mini ice age, because it was very cold. I'm hoping what they're saying is we're going into a mini ice age, not into an ice age, because an ice age, you know, they're really off base if they say we're going in an ice age. That's many thousands of years away.
I believe a lot of people are more going into like a modern state minimum, but turning into, I've heard people trying to put the puzzle together, combining, you know, volcanic activity, cosmic rays, sunspot data, tree ring data, all, like everything. There are people out there worried that there's going to be some kind of glaciation, and I think that's where, in the community we work with, that's where the most fear is. You know, these people envisioning a big iceberg take over, you know, North America. And that's to me, I just observe the information coming in, and I like sort of laying it on the table and allowing people to discuss their thoughts, because it's really hard these days in the science community for people to do that, because there's so many, I talk a lot about people sort of grasping onto one answer and making it almost a religion, where they lose sight of everything else that might factor in to the truth. So having everyone working together, sharing their facts in a like objective manner is so important, and I hope as people see these natural cycles come to play, that it is real. It's not like a man-made global warming epidemic, you know, it's something natural, that we can actually broaden the discussion. And really what society needs is to learn how to adapt with this change so there is not famine. We're in modern society, we should be able to come up with solutions where people aren't going to starve. You know, we have to learn, and we have time to plan for that.
Well, that's true, and most of the people on Earth right now did not live through the 1950s and 60s during that very cold period. And that's what we're going to have, is actually the United States saw a taste of it this year, but even this year wasn't as cold as the 1950s and 60s. And it's going to be a shock to the people when we get this weather, because they're going to say, where did this come from? They're used to global warming. And when we get back to normalcy here, they're gonna think it's an ice age when it's not really an ice age. But we're gonna see the glaciers rebuilding for about 120 years. Ice will be extending out much more and thicker than it has been during the past 15 years, that's for sure. There is major changes coming, but it's not an ice age. But it is going to be drastically colder than what we've seen.
And with that comes the crop failures, the famine, and disease, which, if a bit of planning ahead and adapting, whether it be to growing indoors or just adapting a more sustainable, you know, lifestyle. I mean, there's so many different solutions. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jake?
It's interesting to hear everybody's take on what's going to happen. I'm just glad that you were willing to come on. You have experience with NOAA. you're a pretty big name, and you're not afraid to talk about global cooling. And I'm just thankful that we actually had a guest, you know, like I said, it wasn't afraid to tell the truth, talk about cycles. You don't sound politically driven. You just give the facts straight out. And like Mari said, really, Mari pretty much took everything out of my head. We just have to learn how to adapt and not buy into the sensationalism of what some people are trying to hype this up to be, or maybe undersell it. So really, it's just a preference and a perception, really.
Well, that's true. We don't want to oversell it, but one thing we have to watch out for is, are we going to have one of these VMI 5 to 6 volcanoes, probably a 6, very strong volcano. VMI 6 is like saying a Category 5 hurricane. Are we going to have that sometime between, say, 2025 to 2035 to 2040? It could be anywhere in there. It could even come as early as 2023. But sometime in that period, we are going to have a huge volcano in connection with the global cooling cycle. And there's a high probability that the Earth will see a year of no summer in the northern latitudes.
Yeah.
And we have to learn from what happened from China up through Europe during that period, and even here in the United States. In 1816, in July, there was ice on small ponds in Pennsylvania, killing frost all the way from New England to Virginia every month of the summer. And this could very well happen again, not too distant future from now. And we're going to have to be prepared for it, because if it does happen, and there's a high probability, there will be a shortage of food. And
you're echoing a lot of what John Casey has said as well. He's predicted a major volcano eruption between now and the 2030s. And so, and it, like, again, it's on a cycle. The last big one we had was in 1850. So technically, by you saying 2023 is probably right about the area where we might see a first big one, or maybe just a little earlier. So,
well, we're going to see an increase in earthquake activity in the early 2020s, and the volcano is a little bit harder to predict. John Casey told me they're monitoring 3 big volcanoes that have the potential of being a major volcanic activity. Now, no one knows exactly when they'll go, but John and I, we've done presentations together, and we're on the same page pretty much on the timetable on things occurring. It's just he's a little bit more, well, he uses the solar activity, and I'm using predominantly the interactions of the Earth, Moon, Sun.
But it's amazing how your cycles and other people's cycles still correlate the same thing, and that's right. That's the interesting part about your research and others.
That's right. We're all coming up with pretty much the same type of information as far as what will be happening.
And I just think it's fantastic that you have spent this time with us to answer our questions. I know it's such a broad topic, there's so much to discuss, but we could probably wrap it up now. I just want to thank you again, David, for taking your time with us and explaining your thoughts and opinions on the earth changes that are happening on our planet. And hopefully more people will listen and sort of open their eyes and try to see the big picture, to not be so surprised in the near future when food is starting to sort of trickle off. They're more prepared.
Right, and they will be surprised when it happens. And actually, global cooling started about the year 2014 or so.
Yeah, I believe
it's
that.
already started, because the northern portions of the United States had real bad winters in 2014, 2013, then 2015 we had the El Nino that warmed everything up.
Yeah.
Or 2016 we did, excuse me.
I remember the 2014 winter was very brutally cold. We had 2 different deep polar vortexes. I was living in southwest Ohio, and we were looking at highs in the mid, below zero, 17 below zero was some of the highs for the days. And then when we got the second shot of polar vortex, it wasn't as cold, but we're talking daytime highs and -6, -4 for 3 or 4 consecutive days. And even after that, we're looking at 13, 10 degrees for highs for several days after that. So That's interesting that you brought up 2014, because I also believe that's when the cooling started too. That was a very strange snap of cold air that I've ever experienced. I'm only 40, but like you said, people who didn't grow up in the 50s and 60s, this is going to be a shock.
Well, the ice in the Arctic was starting to regenerate greatly in 2014, 2013. And then the big El Nino came on in 2015, and that interrupted everything. Then it started to restore a little bit, and the La Nina, kind of a strange pattern this year, is hurt it a little bit. But as the La Nina goes away, we're going to be back into that major ice restoration we had in 2013, 2014. And really, 4 out of the last 5 winters up in the northern tier states have been a little bit more normal, more like the 1960s.
Yeah.
It's been much colder and snowier. So it really did begin back in 2014. It just takes time to cool down the oceans and get things more uniform around the Earth so everyone realizes the cooling. It's just going to take a few more years to get everything in place to where it really gets cold. But this winter, that was a pretty good shot of cold air.
It's a good start.
Makes people think a little bit more about what it was in the 1960s. But like you were saying, it was minus this and that up there. And we have a summer cottage in Maine, and I believe it got down probably minus 25 where we were up there. But when I grew up in Vermont, northern Vermont, in the 50s and 60s, it was pretty common that you would go from about Christmas into March without getting temperatures up to freezing.
Wow.
It'd be 32 degrees or below during the whole period. Now, they didn't see that this year. We've had a mix of some warmer shots of air up there mixed in with cold, and there's more cold air coming. Looking at models for the next couple of weeks.
Oh yeah.
If you're living up there, it's going to be some cold shots coming in. So we're getting normal here. Even over in Europe, London, Great Britain is going to see their coldest air of the winter coming in during the next couple of weeks. So it's starting to spread. It's starting to spread, and just wait for the next couple of years. It's going to be cold.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So thanks again. Our viewers are followers of you, so I'm sure, they're going to be very excited to hear this conversation.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
On our channel. So I would just like to thank you again for doing what you're doing, staying true, and spreading that awareness so people can prepare and adapt.
Yep.
And I thank you for spreading the word.
Thank you for tuning in to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today I'd like to cover how a geomagnetic storm is ranked. A geomagnetic storm is a temporary disturbance of the Earth's magnetosphere associated with solar coronal mass ejections, coronal holes, or solar flares. A geomagnetic storm is caused by a solar wind shock wave, which typically strikes the Earth's magnetic field 24 to 36 hours after the event. Storms result in intense currents in the magnetosphere, changes in the radiation belts, and changes in the ionosphere, including heating the ionosphere and upper atmosphere region called the thermosphere. In space, a ring of westward current around the Earth produces magnetic disturbances on the ground. A measure of this current, the disturbance storm time, or DST index, has been used historically to characterize the size of a geomagnetic storm. In addition, there are currents produced in the magnetosphere that follow the magnetic field called field-aligned currents, and these connect to intense currents in the auroral ionosphere. These auroral currents, called the auroral electrojets, also produce large magnetic disturbances. Together, all these currents and the magnetic deviations elements they produce on the ground are used to generate a planetary geomagnetic disturbance index called KP. This index is the basis for one of the 3 NOAA space weather scales, the geomagnetic storm, or G scale, that is used to describe space weather that can disrupt systems on Earth. NOAA's 5-level system, the G scale, is used to indicate the severity of both observed and predicted geomagnetic activity. This scale is used to give quick indication of the severity of a geomagnetic storm. This scale ranges from G1 to G5, with G1 being the lowest level and G5 being the highest level. Conditions below storm level are labeled as G0, but this value is not commonly used. Every G level has a certain KP value associated with it. G1 is a minor storm. G2 is moderate. G3 is a strong storm. G4 is severe. And G5 is an extreme storm. With G5 storms, our power systems may experience widespread voltage control problems, and protective system problems can occur. Some grid systems may experience complete collapse or blackouts. Transformers may experience damage. Spacecraft operations may experience extensive surface charging, problems with orientation, and tracking satellites. High-frequency radio propagation may be impossible in many areas for 1 or 2 days. Satellite navigation may be degraded for days. Low-frequency radio navigation can be out for hours, and aurora has been seen as low as Florida and southern Texas. According to NOAA, this happens an average of 4 days per 11-year solar cycle. With a G4 storm, possible widespread voltage control problems and some protective systems may mistakenly trip out key assets from the grid. Spacecraft operations may experience surface charging and tracking problems. Corrections may be needed for orientation problems. High-frequency radio propagation may be sporadic. Satellite navigation degraded for hours. Low-frequency radio navigation disrupted, and aurora has been seen as low as Alabama and Northern California. According to NOAA, this happens an average of 60 days per 11-year solar cycle. A G3 is a strong storm. Voltage corrections may be required. False alarms triggered on some protection devices. Surface charging may occur on satellite components. Drag may increase on low Earth orbit satellites, and corrections may be needed for orientation problems. Intermittent satellite navigation and low-frequency radio navigation problems may occur. High-frequency radio may be intermittent, and aurora has been seen as low as Illinois and Oregon. According to NOAA, this happens an average of 130 days per 11-year solar cycle. With a G2 moderate storm, high-altitude power systems may experience voltage alarms, and long-duration storms may cause transformer damage. With spacecraft, corrective actions to orientation may be required by ground control. There may be possible changes in drag effect of orbit predictions. High-frequency radio propagation can fade at higher latitudes, and aurora has been seen as low as New York and Idaho. According to NOAA, this happens an average of 360 days per 11-year solar cycle. With a G1 storm, this is very minor. Weak power grid fluctuations may occur. Minor impact on satellite operations are possible. With G1 or higher storms, migratory animals are affected, and aurora is commonly visible at higher altitudes, including northern Michigan and Maine. According to NOAA, this happens an average of 900 days per 11-year solar cycle. We hope this has been helpful. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and share.
On global warming. He sees solar cycles as the primary driver of climate change, not carbon emissions. Casey's controversial new bestseller, Dark Winter, argues
never been spoken. Never been spoken to quite this way. We've never been warned like this before, all of us, about climate change, nor have so many countries agreed quite this much on the clear and present danger it represents. Here is the takeaway. Unless the world changes course quickly and dramatically, the fundamental systems that support human civilization are at risk. This is all coming from the UN.
We've been told that Earth's climate has been changing. And for 30 years, scientists supporting the United Nations view have inserted the idea of man-made global warming into our consciousness, into our politics, schools, and even our churches.
There's one issue that will define the contours of this century more dramatically than any other, and that is the urgent and growing threat of a changing climate. We cannot condemn our children and their children to a future that is beyond their capacity to repair.
With current climate trends setting record cold temperatures, many are questioning global warming theories. And a growing number of climate scientists are seeing that global temperature data no longer shows a heating trend, and that most of the global warming predictions have failed to come true. And scientists who challenge the global warming consensus are now targeted for attack. John Casey is a highly credentialed scientist and engineer who has stood up to the establishment on global warming. He sees solar cycles as the primary driver of climate change, not carbon emissions. Casey's controversial new bestseller, Dark Winter, argues that global warming has ended and a new, more ominous threat faces humanity. A period of plummeting temperatures that's enveloping the planet that will radically change life on Earth, including political unrest, famines, mass migrations of people, and even a wave of unprecedented earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Casey, a former White House Space Program advisor and space shuttle engineer, is the president of the Space and Science Research Corporation, a respected climate science organization. He has been a voice of reason challenging global warming propaganda, as he shows, along with a number of leading climate scientists, that the Earth has actually entered a period of rapid cooling as sunspot activity begins its downward trend. Not a member of the academic elite, Casey's scientific, real-world credentials set him apart.
According to NASA and NOAA's own science data and their satellite data that we monitor, the Arctic and the Antarctic are both getting colder. Sea ice is growing rapidly, and so the reality is quite different between what the warmists have predicted and what is really happening with our climate. This is even more graphic when you look at the relational cycle theory and what it predicted. For example, we predicted that the global warming would end between 2007 and 2010. We had a news conference in 2008 to announce that it had in fact already ended, that a new cold era had begun. All of the predictions then, and there are many from the Space and Science Research Corporation and other global cooling researchers, have in general come to pass, whereas most of the major predictions from the UN and even our own U.S. science agencies in the last 6 years have failed utterly.
Al Gore, President Obama, the UN, and other global warming leaders, rather than admit their predictions have not come true, have chosen to attack the very scientists who have been proven right and have stood up to global warming narratives. Dr. Willie Soon of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics studies the impact of solar cycles on Earth's climate. Dr. Soon receives funding from the fossil fuel industry for his research because scientists backed by global warming funding have cut him off.
The sun, of course, in terms of its light energy output, is probably the only true external driver of the Earth climate system, because there is no other forces on Earth that would supply that amount of energy for the air to move around, the ocean current to move around, or trees to grow. So there is no doubt that the sun is the main driver and supplier of energy to the Earth weather and climate system. They are clearly promoting the vision that if we do not cut our carbon dioxide emission, disaster, crisis, whichever bad connotation you can find, will come to Earth. So it is that kind of alarmism that appalls me as a scientist. There is no one in the world who would insist that everything is having to do with the sun. All we are trying to do is that there's this plausible picture of how the sun could cause some of the changes in the climate system. Why not study it carefully? It's very, very difficult, in my opinion, to try to insist and suggest that carbon dioxide, even as of today, when we emit this carbon dioxide, is going to drive the climate system. It's a complete false picture.
Climate change or climate variation occurs all the time, as it has for millions of years. These changes in climate are produced by, we believe, changes in solar or solar system gravitational field and energy output from the sun. As a result, we have studied, and I specifically have studied, a family of cycles that do cause this climate change. That includes a 206-year-long cycle, which is the one that is changing over now and ended the past global warming and has begun a new cycle of global cooling.
In January 2015, President Obama declared 2014 to be the hottest year on record, despite recent revelations that data he used is flawed or fabricated.
2014 was the planet's warmest year on record.
As the debate today rages over man-made CO2 and its link to global warming, and despite claims of 2014 being the hottest year ever, there has been a problem. Analysis reveals that for the past decade, global temperatures have, in fact, stabilized, and that some areas of the planet are actually cooling.
We've heard in the State of the Union address from President Obama that 2014 was the warmest year on record. Is that true? Is that accurate? Certainly the global warming camp will go along with that. I mean, this is the President of the United States making this statement. But on the scientific community side, those of us who follow temperature measurement and temperature trends know that the President wasn't accurate once more in his proclamations on climate change. 2014, according to 5 major global data sets that we follow on global temperature, both atmospheric and oceanic, says that it may have been the 3rd or 6th warmest in the last 15, but was clearly not the warmest. What we've been told for quite some time now is that climate change of any kind is caused by mankind. That is a modification of what used to be called man-made global warming. When it became apparent that the Earth was cooling, that climate terminology shifted to just climate change, and in my opinion was simply a political co-op to include virtually any change of climate somehow being blamed on mankind. It is more a political definition than a realistic one.
A review of the 5 major global temperature data sets, records for the last 18 years, are far from conclusive that global warming has continued despite what we are being told.
The idea of science is you're really supposed to be skeptical, so there's always a quest to verify what we know, to understand that we haven't made a mistake, and that we continue on and develop science. And if we've closed our mind, if we close the doors, we are now shutting ourselves out from the real truth, which is what science is all about after all.
How did global warming become a global obsession? A Hollywood storyline was not a bad way to start. In the next segment, John Casey confronts the conventional thinking on climate change.
It's pretty rare that you'll encounter somebody who says the problem you're trying to solve simply doesn't exist. Today's Congress is full of folks who stubbornly and automatically reject the scientific evidence about climate change. They will tell you it is a hoax.
Anyone who confronts the dogma of the day will find out that, like all other prior instances in history, you get ignored first, and then you get attacked.
It's pretty rare that you'll encounter somebody who says the problem you're trying to solve simply doesn't exist.
And it has always been a confrontation between establishment science and the mavericks that come along that say, hold it a minute, you need to consider something else.
In recent years, a handful of intrepid climate experts began seeing inconsistencies in the data supporting the global warming theory. Though all of these scientists agree that the planet had been warming for the past 200 years, the most recent climate data indicates the Earth's warming has stopped, and temperatures are now either stable or cooling.
One member of Congress actually says the world is cooling.
Recently, Britain's Telegraph newspaper headlined the biggest science scandal ever. The paper reported that scientists had been caught tampering with recorded temperatures, from ones that showed a clear cooling trend to that of a warming one.
There's also a summary for policymakers. It's put together by policymakers, and in many cases, they go back to the scientists and say, can you change the science document to match our summary? We want to beef this up. We want to make it look worse. That's not the way science is done. What we have to remember is climate changes and climate fluctuates. And really, while we think humans have an impact on our environment, which we do, the global climate system is still far too complex to be simply affected by one change in one small component of it.
Climate experts like Dr. Legates and John Casey think many experts are cooking the books. Climatologists challenging the global warming consensus believe the scientific data proves them right and shows that the sun's sunspot activity plays a much greater role in the Earth's climate than man-made carbon emissions. After years of research, Casey has published his book, Dark Winter, based on his relational cycle, or RC, theory. He says records of temperatures and atmospheric CO2 during the past 650,000 years indicate that Earth's temperature always rises first, followed by a rise in carbon dioxide by several hundred years.
A warmer Earth gives birth to more vegetation, which in turn has a more active carbon cycle. And so as a result, carbon dioxide may in fact follow the temperature change as opposed to being a leading indicator.
Published papers clearly shows that it is always the temperature rises first by at least several hundred years to a few thousand years. And then the carbon dioxide curve responds and it follows. So it is a very clear scientific consensus on this issue.
It's very important to understand that we were, in fact, in a state of global warming right up until the middle of the 2000s. But then it stopped. It stopped because the sun stopped it. It stopped on the sun because the sun's 206-year cycle reversed direction, from warming to cooling. That's the big picture. It's nothing more complicated than that. And for those of us who follow the sun, that's why we're so encouraged with the reliability of these solar cycles. And I encourage everyone who used to believe the man-made global warming story, like I used to believe, to look into solar cycles, to look at solar activity, and for sure, for the next few years or few decades, please follow what's happening with the sun. And here we have the northern hemisphere, the tropics, and the southern hemisphere. Northern hemisphere has been, as you can see, the 2003 to 2007 period where the peak occurred. It's been meandering, no change. Now see, this is what we were talking about. This is the secondary peak in the current 11-year solar cycle, which is more powerful than the first peak. Now, what that represented, unbeknownst to most people studying climate, is that the sun is sending us a signal that it's about to go into deep cold phase. This is a crucial signal from the sun that absolutely no one in the mainstream media is aware of. And in fact, most people in the scientific community are not aware of. But it's one that I found and wrote up the significance of this important event in the last Global Climate Status Report. But this is the crucial signal that we've been waiting for all along.
In the next segment, John Casey reveals how politicians have forced scientists to conform data to their global warming agenda. In 2007, with the help of Al Gore's Oscar-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, global warming was catapulted onto the national and international stage. From the United Nations General Assembly in New York to the halls of Congress, global warming adherents have been sounding the alarm with scenarios of impending global chaos.
We've seen celebrities and prominent politicians like former Vice President Al Gore step up to the plate, issue a movie called Inconvenient Truth. He received an Oscar. He went on to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, along with Dr. Pachauri from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for creating awareness of this threat of man-made climate change caused by CO2.
Faced with record cold winters now engulfing the planet, global warming theorists still won't change their conclusion that human-produced CO2 emissions are responsible for global warming, and that by the year 2100, a disastrous overheating of the planet will force wildlife species to the brink of extinction, melt ice caps and glaciers north to south, pushing sea levels upward, soon overwhelming us, flooding New York, Miami, San Francisco, and other major coastal cities around the world, as numerous and more destructive hurricanes were predicted to strike, and that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2013, and that global warming is not only real, but that it has been caused by human activity, and the United States economy is the leading villain. But none of their dire predictions have come true, yet they insist on massive government regulations and taxes on anyone using carbon-based fuels.
If we step back and we look at the big picture on this climate debate, we see that there are actually three groups involved. The first group is the best known. It's the one that's the man-made global warming theory caused by industrial greenhouse gases, primarily CO2, from our industry plants. This group is best known by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UNIPCC, and its periodic climate reports that espouse the greenhouse gas theory and say that the world is in danger and at great threat because of mankind's CO2. What we have found out since then is very different. And as a result, a second group has formed to oppose that first group. That first group also added President Obama in more recent years, a primary advocate for greenhouse gas and man-made global warming. We see that this second group opposes that first group. They have in fact done a great deal of research and come up with scientific rationale to show that the fundamental science of the greenhouse gas theory simply is not that important in climate change. But there is a third group. The third group is the one to which I belong and other scientists and climatologists around the world. We believe that the first two groups are really done a great job on the debate, but we need to stop the debate. And the reason we need to stop is because the sun is, in fact, the primary driver for climate change. And the new change, the new cold climate produced by the sun demands that we all start getting prepared. We don't have much time left. I think it's important to understand that the vast majority of people are simply too busy with day-to-day life to really look into the question of what's causing climate change below the headlines of the news media, below the words from the news anchor on the evening news. What I have come to learn, the most important issue that we all face, is really how do you differentiate? What do you believe? Another example is the melting of the sea ice in the Arctic. We've heard many people predict when the Arctic would be absolutely ice-free. It never happened, of course. Other scientists from our own government agencies predicted it would be gone by 2013. That never happened. We were also told that ocean temperatures and atmospheric temperatures could only go up. Well, what's the reality? We now know after decades of global temperature tracking, especially during the satellite era, with very accurate data, that ocean temperatures actually stopped warming in 2003. And have been essentially cooling or stable since then. Who can the average person on the street trust when it comes to whether we're warming, whether we're cooling, and what data to use? If we look at the many predictions made by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, our own U.S. scientific establishment, we see that they've made many predictions that have never come true. For example, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted that global warming over the last 15 years should have increased by 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit. It didn't even come close. The actual temperature measurement was 0.09 degrees Fahrenheit by one data set, and even colder than that by other data sets. The track record of the global warming community is a terrible track record, with error rates 90 to 300%, with major predictions like melting sea ice and glacial ice that simply haven't happened, with ocean temperatures and atmospheric temperatures that have stopped warming and now gone to cooling. So clearly, the solar physics community, the global cooling community, has gotten this one right for over a decade now.
In the next segment, John Casey reveals how a new solar cycle will radically impact life on Earth. In the aftermath of recent unprecedented cold winters, the UN and climate scientists are scrambling to explain their theories, when the scientific data and the experience of hundreds of millions living on the planet shows it is simply not true. Today, John Casey's book, Dark Winter, says the Earth is on the cusp of a significant drop in global temperatures as sunspot activity has already diminished and is expected to plummet to near zero over the next 5 to 10 years. Still, the UN and leading scientists and many politicians refuse to consider the impact of solar cycles on temperature. With their reputations on the line and untold billions of investment into the global warming theory at risk, questioning the near consensus thinking has not been allowed. In Dark Winter, author John Casey shows that the sun is clearly moving into a period known as a solar minimum, a period marked by greatly reduced sunspots and solar flares. As this solar activity declines, Earth temperatures will continue to fall, and these solar minimums have other consequences.
One of the other things we've learned about studying history and its relationship to climate variation has been a very startling component to this story. The fact that we have our very worst earthquakes and our very worst, largest volcanic eruptions at the bottom of these cold solar hibernations.
Today's rate of volcanic eruptions is at the highest point in recorded history. Substantial volcanic activity is being recorded in Chile, Iceland, and the ongoing massive eruptions in Indonesia. The combination of increased volcanic activity and massive ash plumes distributed high in the atmosphere shield the planet from the sun and ensures the Earth will enter a period of intense cooling.
Research I've participated in with other eminent geologists around the planet is very clear on this. Our worst earthquakes and volcanoes, our worst geophysical events happen at the same time the planet gets coldest. Let's look at the last time we had a solar hibernation in the 1793 to 1830 period, the Dalton minimum, if you will. The world's largest series of earthquakes occurred at that very time we were at the bottom of that solar hibernation. This was from 1811 to 1812. It didn't occur in Asia. It didn't occur in California or Mexico or Turkey or China. It occurred right here in the middle of the United States. Many people that live there know it well. It's called the New Madrid Fault. And the New Madrid Fault erupted with 3 catastrophic earthquakes, 2 7.5s and an 8.0 approximately, within just a few months of each other during the winter of 1811, 1812. If that same earthquake tragedy were to happen, the U.S. economy would be devastated. Hundreds of thousands would be dead. The infrastructure in the central U.S. would be totally destroyed. Also on the volcano side, 1815, at the bottom of the last solar hibernation, the last cold phase of the sun, the world's largest recorded volcanic eruption happened in Mount Tambora in Indonesia. Mount St. Helens, May 18, 1980, that every American is aware of, was a catastrophic eruption as well, killed many people still living near the base of that volcano, caused dust to be scattered across much of the northwestern U.S. and the Rockies. However, Mount Tambora was 100 times the size of Mount St. Helens. The question of whether volcanoes have an impact on the climate is very real. It's another area that the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change pretty much dismissed. It wasn't even in a major factor in these early reports.
On TV, in our workplaces and schools, Americans have been conditioned to believe that we are responsible for climate change. They have been exposed to a generation-long barrage of global warming propaganda, scare tactics, and manipulation of data to impose a socialist economic agenda on governments across the globe.
It's interesting when you look at the debate over the causes of climate change to see that the vast amount of data that's most accurate are being simply ignored. We still see those like Al Gore and those who oppose Al Gore go back and forth arguing over the role of CO2. But we see very little attention being paid to the most accurate theories, the most reliable science, and the best climate prediction records. They're totally ignored. Certainly one of the main contentions of the warming crowd has been the pointing to weather extremes as a sign of man-made global warming. Again, the reality is that that's not the case. Clearly, we should expect during a transition period from the past global warming to the new global cooling that we will see periodic interactions of deeper, more powerful cold fronts with the still existing warm fronts coming out from the tropics. That will produce extreme weather events, no question. But to say that man-made climate change as a result of CO2 from industrial plants is at the cause is simply not the case. There's been no real demonstration of the connection. So it's not the weather extremes that's important, it's the trend lines. And trend lines are clearly showing we're heading into a cold era. When people hear what I and others like me have to say, they're shocked. Their mouths drop open. They shake their heads. They can't believe what they're hearing because it's so compelling. And that's the power of the truth. But right now, we're still seeing the remnants of the 30 years of propaganda that says that mankind controls the climate, not the sun. These are ominous changes on the sun. Everyone needs to know about them and prepare for them. I am confident that we are growing. There are more people that are hearing this story, hearing the message, reading my book, Dark Winter, and books like it that tell the truth about the climate. So in time, I think we'll achieve the mission and that most of the people will have heard.
In the next segment, John Casey draws a picture of the looming disaster the new cold era will bring. As recent winters break record after record for snow and sub-zero temperatures, the global warming consensus is starting to melt away, making room for a new understanding of climate change. If predictions of a solar minimum causing intense cold prove true, how should people prepare for a cooling planet?
One of the other very important frequent questions I get during my presentations around the country is, okay, we accept what you're saying, but what do we do to prepare for this new cold era? The first thing we need to do is cross an intellectual bridge, a very difficult bridge that transitions from the 30 years of global warming propaganda to a reality based on science and the most reliable science that tells us what's coming. Step number 2 entails studying history. Learn what happened in the last solar hibernations, the Dalton minimum, the Maunder minimum, the Little Ice Age. Study what people did, how they got through it, and how they reacted. And that will give you a good sense. The clear problem that begins, however, is one of food shortage. Unquestionably, that's the main ill effect of these cold eras, because the crops simply die. So what does that mean? It means that we've been able to grow crops at a much higher latitude than we've ever been able to. More crops at a higher latitude. Both of those components are going to disappear as the cold goes further south, as crops have to move further south to adapt. So what do? It means we better have our own food storage on hand. I recommend a 1-year food supply. Be prepared to defend your home and your food supply. When we look back in history, when the food riots began, neighborhoods were destroyed, farms were destroyed, food granaries were destroyed. People would do anything back then to get food. That included killing their neighbors. We need to face the harsh reality of what people become when they start to starve. It's probably one of the worst lessons of history, but it's a lesson, unfortunately, our modern world will have to face in the coming times.
These solar changes will have a cataclysmic impact on Earth and lead to catastrophe for humans who do not prepare.
Still, there is optimism. Optimism comes from knowing what's coming, being prepared, being informed. It's far worse than being told that the Earth is going to warm, when in fact just the opposite is happening. Fortunately, people are now starting to listen to me since all of the predictions I made have come to pass. I want to expand on that. I want to get everyone aware that a new cold era will be coming. It's not the weather extremes that's important, it's the trend lines. And trend lines are clearly showing we're heading into a cold era.
Reduced sunspot activity has been observed and indicates the sun is heading into a 50-year reduced solar activity, similar to what happened in the mid-17th century. This cool down is the result of what scientists call a grand minimum, a periodic event during which the sun's magnetism diminishes. Sunspots form infrequently, and less ultraviolet radiation makes it to the surface of the planet. Scientists believe that the event is triggered at irregular intervals by random fluctuations related to the sun's magnetic field. Scientists have used reconstructions based on geological and historical data to attribute a cold period in Europe in the mid-17th century to such an event named the Maunder Minimum. Temperatures were low enough to freeze the Thames River on a regular basis and freeze the Baltic Sea to such an extent that the Swedish army was able to invade Denmark in 1658 on foot by marching across the sea ice. The reduced energy from the sun sets into motion a sequence of events on Earth beginning within the thinning of the stratospheric ozone layer. That thinning in turn changes the temperature structure of the stratosphere, which then changes the dynamics of the lower atmosphere, especially wind and weather patterns. The cooling is not uniform. While areas of Europe chilled during the Maunder Minimum, other areas such as Alaska and southern Greenland warmed correspondingly. Articles may say, despite how much a Maunder Minimum might have affected Earth the last time, that an upcoming event would not stop the current trend of planetary warming, but might slow it somewhat. The cooling effect of a grand minimum is only a fraction of the warming effect caused by the increasing concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Is that really the case? CO2 has been higher before. Only time will tell. We have other factors to consider as well: galactic cosmic rays, volcanism, earthquakes, magnetic pole shifts. Regardless of what your beliefs may be, the human race is going to face some challenges in the next few decades. Many have grown complacent with daily routine. The masses do not question the teachings to our children from outdated textbooks. We are molded to conform into this society driven by a monetary system that holds no true value. As a human race, we are all slaves to the system. They use fear to control, to confuse, and to breed hate. Where does your fear stem from? Do you question the outside influences around you? The media machine molds our minds, our children's minds. We are fooled into thinking there is a side we need to choose. I will quote from The Lie We Live.
The elite who hide behind the logos of corporations. This is their world, and their most valuable resource is not in the ground. It is us. We build their cities. We run their machines. We fight their wars. After all, money isn't what drives them. It's power. Money is simply the tool they use to control us. Worthless pieces of paper we depend on to feed us, move us, entertain us. They gave us money, and in return, we gave them the world.
Our society has taken for granted what Mother Earth has given us, the means to survive. The majority has lost the skill set to survive. We have lost most of our local farms. We have grown dependent on the convenience of a grocery store. We are bred to consume, consume, and consume on a system that cannot sustain consumption. We are like a plague that has taken over the planet. What other species destroys their environment the way humans do? What will we do? What will our children do when there's nothing more to consume? I don't care what your beliefs are. As a human race, it's imperative we make a shift and adapt to more sustainable lifestyles. The time is now. Let's get back to the basics. Respect our Mother Earth. Teach our children to plant seeds and grow. We need to cut back the waste. We need to heighten our consciousness. I have faith the human race can accept this challenge. We will learn to no longer take for granted all that we have. We are privileged to live in a time where we can be so connected. We can change this. We must work together as a community. I used to work for Apple. I've taken to heart the Crazy Ones poem. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. Thank you for tuning into the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today I would like to go over some volcano headlines and offer my perspective. Here we have an article from express.co.uk. They are known to sensationalize headlines and skew perception. Let's take a look at this article. Yellowstone volcano eruption discovery. Magna plume from Mexico found under supervolcano. Yellowstone National Park researchers have made a shock discovery of a magma plume beneath the park that runs all the way from Mexico, heightening fears the supervolcano is about to blow. Stephen Grand and Peter Nelson from the University of Texas believe they have discovered a column of hot volcanic ash, which is a mixture of particles and gas emitted by an eruption. The plume, which stretches from the core mantle boundary beneath the park, could be the answer to increased volcanic activity at Yellowstone. It comes after experts at Yellowstone National Park claim to have seen the world's largest geyser erupt on the evening of Thursday, March 15th. Let's take a look at Steamboat erupting. Steamboat's major eruptions last from 3 to 40 minutes and are followed by powerful jets of steam. Steamboat does not erupt on a predictable schedule, with recorded intervals between major eruptions ranging from 4 days to 50 years. The geyser was dormant from 1911 to 1961. Minor eruptions of 10 to 15 feet, that's 3 to 5 meters, are much more frequent. After an eruption, the geyser often vents large amounts of steam for up to 48 hours. A spring located nearby will drain completely during a major eruption of the geyser. The spring then refills within a few days. The last 10 major eruptions were on the following dates. This activity has sparked fears among volcano watchers that the supervolcano, located 15 miles south of Steamboat Geyser, is due to erupt. The article then states, and to make this situation even more terrifying, there has been 11 earthquakes in the region since the geysers blew, more evidence of the subsurface action in the magma pits. Well, with this geyser activity, this area will experience some earthquakes. This is considered normal activity. The Express article also states, in their paper published in the journal Nature Geoscience, they say the mantle is approximately 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, which is warmer than any other area. But the pair suggested more research is needed because there are still outstanding questions about how Yellowstone exists in its current location. Now, the title alone is alarming. It obviously did its job because many people are clicking on it and sharing it throughout social media. So let's take a look at the paper they are referencing on nature.com. The Yellowstone hotspot, located in North America, is an interplate source of magmatism, the cause of which is hotly debated. Some argue that a deep mantle plume sourced at the base of the mantle supplies the heat beneath Yellowstone, whereas others claim shallower subduction or lithospheric-related processes can explain the anomalous magmatism. Here we present a shear wave tomography model for the deep mantle beneath the western United States that was made using the travel times of core waves recorded by the dense U.S. Array seismic network. The model reveals a single, narrow, cylindrically shaped slow anomaly, approximately 350 kilometers in diameter, that we interpret as a whole mantle plume. The anomaly is tilted to the northeast and extends from the core mantle boundary to the superficial position of the Yellowstone hotspot. The structure gradually decreases in strength from the deepest mantle towards the surface, and if it's purely a thermal anomaly, this implies an initial excess temperature of 650 to 850 degrees Celsius. Our results strongly support a deep origin for the Yellowstone hotspot, and also provide evidence for the existence of thin thermal mantle plumes that are currently beyond the resolution of global tomography models. So essentially, they are dissecting how the volcano originally formed in that particular location. They conclude by suggesting that there is likely a thin plume stretching from the core mantle boundary beneath the park, and that it's responsible for the volcanism seen at Yellowstone. But they also acknowledge that more research is required because there are still questions regarding how Yellowstone exists in its current location. They theorize that it's possible because the plume is held steady by a part of the Pacific Large Low Shear Velocity Province. They finish by suggesting that current methods used by other researchers to study the plumes may not be adequate because global tomography is not capable of capturing thin thermal plumes such as the one they suggest lies beneath Yellowstone. Last November, a similar finding made headlines when NASA discovered a mantle plume almost as hot as Yellowstone supervolcano that's melting Antarctica from below. That team concluded the Marie Birdland mantle plume formed 50 to 110 million years ago, long before the land was hidden by ice. Heat from it, they say, has an important local impact on the ice sheet, and understanding these processes will allow researchers to work out what will happen to it in the future. The largest earthquake ever to strike Yellowstone Park was a magnitude 7.3 quake in 1959. The Yellowstone caldera supervolcano last erupted 700,000 years ago, but experts say it should blow every 1 million years or so. As you can see with the media, it's sometimes hard to discern and look at things objectively. We all must slow down, zoom out, and be objective without jumping to conclusions. Thanks for tuning in to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. As always, we'll keep you updated. Please like and share.
Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today is Wednesday, March 21st, 2018. Hope everything's going well for you guys. Do a quick little update for tonight. I've got several things I want to mention. This has been a very, very explosive week, in my opinion, of lots of information coming out about the Grand Solar Minimum. And I will post the article that I really want to feature after this broadcast. But first, let's get into our space weather report first, and then I'll elaborate a little bit more. Taking a look at our current solar wind speeds right now, we are at 360.7 kilometers per second with a density of only 6.2. Looking at our sunspots today, we do not have any. This will make now 3 days in a row with no sunspots, 43 days in 2018. Take a look at our KP indices. We are in the quiet side as well, with a KP of 2 and a 24-hour max of 2 as well. And here's the SDO's latest imagery of the corona hole situation. They're putting it 3 different regions. Obviously, one's already facing away from Earth, or beginning to, and then we have some that are coming right now. NOAA has forecasted a arrival of the solar wind on March 22nd for minor G1 storm activity. So nothing to write home about, but just wanted to make everyone aware. Once again, March 22nd, we will be under a watch for a G1 geomagnetic class storm. So we'll keep our eyes open on that. We should see some increased solar wind speed, somewhere between 475 and 550 kilometers per second, if that. Go ahead and look at our oh, speaking of sunspots, real quick, I want to mention, and I want to thank the Starman, by the way. He tweeted out a very interesting tweet earlier today. This guy does his own research, folks. He's a very trusted source of information. He hasn't steered me wrong yet, and I don't think he's going to in the near future or in the long term either. But he puts, heads up, could be signs of the first glimpse of cycle 25. Let us see if it revolves or decays before we see it Earthside. Too high to be associated with cycle 24, depending on polarity. And here's the graphs that he put up as well. I'll go ahead and leave this here for a second. Take a quick look at it, folks. So once again, good catch, Starman. He also brought my attention to an earlier article as well. Ooh, that's not what I wanted. Hello. Okay. So, more proof that Arctic sea ice isn't going anywhere. And I know you've seen me jokingly put up the Earth Null and clicking on parts of the Arctic for sea ice. Now, I looked at this article today. This talks about, the best part about this paper is that it does talk about how in these grand solar minimums, especially the one that we're in or heading into, this type, it is common for stratospheric warming to happen in the Arctic. Now, the one thing that upsets me the most about this is that here lately we've come under fire for a lot of people saying that the Arctic is melting, that it was 45 degrees above average, and that, the sea ice is melting, and that we have low sea ice. That's absolutely false. I've seen so many charts and graphs today of thickness of the sea ice right now in the Arctic, and guys, it's the thickest. If anything, the very top of our poles right now, especially in the North Pole, we're experiencing temperatures in the minus 40s Celsius. That ice freezes very fast, and it's getting very thick up there. So this article is packed full of information. I recommend you take a little time and go through this carefully, because like I said, there's a lot in here to absorb. But nevertheless, another great find by the Starman, who I find a very reliable source of information. He's helping everybody in the Grand Solar Minimum community. He's like the utility player. You can put him at any position on a baseball field and he's going to do well. So works well with others, and if anything, he is a bridge for the Grand Solar Minimum community. So once again, David, great find, and thank you for your hard work and your constant dedication to this topic. Looking at our TSI report, right now we came in at a 1361.141. Not much of a rise, but a slight one at that. So we've been in the low part of the 1361 values here for a while. That has not changed. And I think I got all the space weather. Yeah, I did. Okay. So let's move on to some headlines, and then I will go ahead and get to our weather forecast. The one that I really wanted to show everybody was the watchers put together a very, very explicit article here that shows the hail that was reported in Texas. Now, I know we had some massive storms in Alabama where we saw tornadoes. We had 9 tornadoes. We had large hail reported. but this is incredible. You know, this right here is probably more golf ball size, but just tons of pictures coming in from Texas of the size of this. There's the baseball size hail right there. Can you imagine getting hit with this? I mean, not even on the head, just on the shoulder or on the back. You're just outside trying to get in your home and you get struck by one of these bad boys. That's going to leave a mark. But just absolutely incredible. And, you know, somebody said something about to me earlier about how that, you know, Texas gets hail, Texas gets tornadoes, nothing new to see. What does this have to do with the grand solar minimum? Well, all year long, and especially in 2017, we've seen pictures from Europe, Spain, France, Italy, you name it, Brazil, all over the world with sizes of hail like what we're seeing here in Texas and Alabama. Alabama got some of the same sizes as well, guys. But, you know, we've talked about hail being, a bigger hail being increased because of the grand solar minimum, because of cosmic rays, because of the cooler atmospheres. We are seeing more and more extreme weather, and in correlation to what Starman was talking about, the sunspot, you know, if it does hold up, and it is in fact the official beginning of solar cycle 25, we're almost a full year ahead of schedule if that happens. And this all ties into an article that Mari found today. It's titled "Rogue Sunspot Spoils Chances for Long-Term Space Weather Forecasting." And it's kind of misleading at first. When I saw the headline, I was like, oh, they're going to try to debunk that we're not heading into a minimum. Actually, excuse me, it's actually quite the opposite of what they're doing here. And the person that wrote this piece here is also part of the research team of a university in Canada, I do believe. But they're talking about the sunspot cycles here. And the thing that really sticks out the most to me that Mari brought up is the activity that we had in September. And we've spoke about this here recently. We saw 2 X-class flare events in September of 2017, which also, you know, we had some extreme weather on our planet during that month as well. If you remember, we had Hurricane Harvey really kicked off the month. And, you know, it's kind of weird, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mari, but September and March, with the hurricanes that we had coming through in September, and then the nor'easters we've had in March, you know, it's almost kind of, except the difference is that we didn't have all the sunspots in March to, you know, fuel the hurricanes. So what's the excuse for these nor'easters? Obviously, it has a lot to do with the way the polar vortex was set up. We had blocking in Greenland. But, you know, when you found this article, what was your first, like, impression when you were actually soaking in the words? And I just want to get your kind of take on this.
Well, when I read the article, it just sort of gave me chills, because when you see articles like this, it's very sobering, because you realize more and more everything you've been researching is more and more real. And essentially this article goes over and talks about, you know, similar work to like what Valentina goes over, what these universities are going over. But essentially rogue sunspots can trigger grand minima. And as you read through it, it explains why and the technicalities of it. And, you know, the basic summary of it is these sunspots, this particular incident that happened, I believe it was I don't have the article in front of me, I believe it was in September.
Yes.
You know, they are evaluating it further to see if it could be considered a rogue sunspot. Now, to me, they're playing it off at the end like, oh, we don't know, we're going to research it more. But to me, it's like they know something significant went on with that sunspot. They're analyzing it further, and it's just another piece of the puzzle that shows we are definitely going into this grand minimum. There's more and more signs, you know, at every turn, with every new scientific paper that comes out confirming, yes, indeed, we're going into a grand solar minimum. and the consequences are going to be great. I mean, look at the article we shared yesterday on Forbes, and look at the TV shows we've shared. I mean, no, not TV. Fox had an article recently. Sky News had a program on their TV show. So, I mean, it seems to me this year is like the year that everything's sort of trickling out. You know, we're getting that confirmation. You know, when before, I remember when we started this channel, we got laughed at. We had, like, you know, hordes of debunkers, like, shoving global warming down our throats. They thought we were crazy and all that, but every step forward we make, it just confirms more and more, hey, we're changing and we need to adapt. There's nothing we can do about it. It's all out of our hands. The only thing we can do is evolve and come up with solutions to, you know, adapt to the changes in this wild weather that's going to come with it. We just have to look back in history to see what has happened, and, you know, basically look forward, learning from our past, and, you know, get through it.
And, you know, the reason why this article is brought up, and it's just kind of strange how Mari found this article right after, pardon me, Starman sent us a heads up about the sunspot starting off solar cycle 25. This to me confirms, and when you guys go over this article, you'll understand why we're kind of like, you know, making a big deal about this. But this to me, they're telling us that we're going to be heading into, it's possible. I guess they shouldn't say in stone, but what they're implying is that we are heading into, if this information holds to be true, with the rogue sunspot region back in September, this is an indicator that we are going into a Maunder minimum type of minimum. And I wrote an article for this on our website. I'll post it after the show. But my thoughts are, there's no more me trying to put that soft landing question mark, maybe it won't be as bad anymore to this. After reading this report, I now know that week by week, in 2018, they are slowly disclosing and just trying to get a feel of how the feedback's going to be to the rest of the world when they start releasing this information. And I think this is a clear sign that not only are we heading into a grand solar minimum, but we're going to be getting really cold mini ice age type atmosphere. So no more maybe it won't be as bad thoughts from my head anymore. This article and yesterday's information, just over the last couple of weeks, I'm really starting to see why so many scientists are starting to think that we're going into a 400-year minimum. Some even think that the Eddy minimum is going to be as long as 1,000 years. We looked at paperwork earlier that showed that after solar cycle 25, that it's being predicted now that these solar cycles are going to be weaker than 24 and 25. Now, 24 is already at its lowest activity in over 100 years out of all the solar cycles. So if they're saying that 25 is going to be a lower output cycle than 24, and 24 is already breaking 100-year records, you know, imagine what 26 and 27 and 28, because folks, the prediction chart that I saw has them rolling all the way out to 29 and 30, that each cycle that goes by will have less and less sunspot activity. And Mari and I, you know, we look at this stuff on our free time, and a lot of times Mari will go back and refer to the Maunder minimum. She really believes, after all the papers that she's read, all the abstracts that she's gone through, she really believes, and I'm convinced with her as well, that we're going to be in a Maunder minimum type law for worse for a very long time. So, you know, I know we're always here to like try to be truthful and, you know, not be sensationalists here, but unfortunately this is not a sensational claim. This is a sobering claim. This is a sobering paper, and this really puts things in perspective and makes me feel like that the reason why we see so many people now getting interested in the grand solar minimum is because there are more scientists now writing papers that are confirming, indeed, we are going into a mini ice age.
Well, and here's another thing. You might want to turn that for me, Jake. I am putting together a video about Africa and just some of the wild things that have been going on there. I started this morning and I just was like, wow. I got sort of distracted, actually. I don't know when I'll have the video out, but what sort of shocked me was when I was going through these articles, a lot of people are talking about the water shortages that are going to be happening in Cape Town. I guess they may only have like a couple months of water left. There's infrastructure issues and all that. It's just interesting to me to read these articles and hear about all the infrastructure plans, and the dates are what really stand out to me. These dates are like, by 2025 this must be done because the population in, you know, Asia and Africa are going to be this, but by 2050 this is gonna happen and we need this and this and this done infrastructure wise. And you know, to me it's like, you just watch this unfold. These countries are going to really ramp up infrastructure, and it's going to be to support populations that can't live in certain hemispheres by 2050. I believe that, truly.
And what Mari's referring to is that she found a bunch of stuff today of Africa. They're getting ready to sign an agreement over there.
They have today.
Oh, they have. So
like, I know at least 40.
So officially today, they've signed with the majority of countries in Africa that there's going to be no more taxes on trade. So it's free trade over there. And, you know, this to me, Mari's right. There's a lot of dates in there, 2025, 2050. A lot of those dates would kind of make you wonder if they're related to what we're getting ready to go through right now. And it also makes you wonder what plans that the world has for Africa to beef up this strategy of getting more infrastructure built. It's not like they don't need it over there. This will be a welcome thing in Africa, but concerns of population right now, overgrowing, that they're saying, and by 2050, that over half of the population of the world will come from Africa. So, or the half of the increase of the population comes from Africa. And I think that goes to show, because they know they're going to have people migrating to that region in the coming decades, with now people being able to have the Free Trade Act in place. This might create...
I'll share that article when I put out that video about Africa. I'll try to get it out tomorrow. I'll share that article.
And while we're talking about a video, before I do the weather report, you know, folks, Mari and I work very hard. We produce our own content here at the Grand Solar Minimum. So whenever you see the videos with the subtitles, you know, that's produced by myself or Mari. Whenever you see a video with the speaking parts, that's produced and written by Mari. Before the comment section gets littered with negative comments, I think some of these people who leave the negative comments should watch the video. I'm not going to mention who they are or what they said, but we had a couple of people make comments about what another channel had said, and pretty much echoed everything that Mari had said in the video. And this is what video I'm referring to is the one about the Yellowstone articles. Look, all Mari was trying to put awareness to is that this is being sensationalized in some other news media outlets, you know, and before you criticize it being clickbait or fear porn, give it a watch. Mari had some very good points. Mari, what did you make out of that when you made that video today? Like, what was your whole mindset, the purpose of putting that video together, so people may understand why, you know, the title may seem misleading, like, oh, she's going to harp on about how dangerous this situation is. No, it's actually the opposite.
Well, my history on YouTube is I really I'm very passionate about combating sensationalism on social media. It bothers me. When I was young and naive, I fell prey to it, and it bothers me genuinely when I see things sensationalized and I see people getting scared. And my biggest thing is people get in these rabbit holes, and it's so important not to lose focus. You have to really, when you are evaluating a subject, you have to stay zoomed out and be objective and look at both sides and really see where the information is coming from. This volcano article spawned from scientific research, which I provided links in that volcano video, and they were investigating essentially why Yellowstone was where it was, how it evolved, and all that. They found the magma chamber, and that sort of turned into, you know, an article to me, the sort of an alarmist title, like, oh my God, Yellowstone's gonna blow because of this and this and this, and you know, there's earthquakes here and geysers there, and oh my God. What people need to realize is these small earthquakes and these geysers are the earth releasing pressure, and it's a good thing. It's not something where you should be alarmed. And I know a lot of people that get sucked into certain rabbit holes want to hang on to certain concepts, but I've been there and done that, and I've evaluated the situation long enough where you have to Jake, you're being noisy. You have to just understand there's two sides to every story. That specific scientific article was not intended to be alarmist or raise concerns. The geyser going off, to me, is a good thing that it's going off because it's releasing pressure. So, you know, a lot of people are getting mad either way. You know, I'm getting people saying that my video was fear porn. I guess they didn't watch it because I thought I was clear enough, sort of making the Express look like they were sensationalizing it. I don't know. And then other people, you know, sort of questioned. I guess they thought I was confused. I don't know. Either way, I just, you know, I appreciate the people that are actually watching the video, taking the information in and understanding it without leaving goofy comments. That's all. I love you guys in the chat. You all are wonderful. Back to Jake.
All right. So I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to understand, you know, and what better way to hear it from the maker herself. But like I said, Mari and I make our own videos. We put together our own footage. Mari does her own editing. She programs her own effects. I mean, take a watch before you make comments that are totally opposite of what the video actually stands for. Or just don't comment at all, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. All right, so we'll go ahead and take a look at tropical tidbits here. We are looking at our winter storm Tobe, which thankfully some of the totals have been kind of tamed down here a little bit with the snow. This thing is going to move out quick overnight. By tomorrow morning, it's going to make its way up the coast, and by late Thursday, we should see it in Maine, making its way up to Canada. But this system will be done dumping the snow as late as early Thursday morning. That system will be completely gone, and then we do have a beautiful clear map all the way from the East Coast till you get to the Four Corners, and then we start to get really messy over here. And the situation in California is not looking good, especially in the Sierras. They did predict snowfall in the feet. That looks like that's going to continue. We are on the 22nd. The bulk of this rain is going to fall between now and tomorrow. And finally, by early Friday, we do see that this system is making its way and departing California, only to have another system enter the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Northern California. You guys are going to get nailed again. And by this weekend, Saturday, 24th of March, this low pressure system will be over the heartland of the United States. Snow to the northern plains and the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then we get rain for Indiana and Ohio. Now, here's where the forecast is going to be really tricky. We talked about this yesterday. We see the snow line here, and it's a very, very thin area. So it's you know, it's talking about hit or miss. It could be a 20, 30-mile thing here. But as you see, it's holding up its original forecast with the snow line being from Cincinnati probably to about the Dayton-Springfield area in Ohio. And of course through Indiana, it looks like Indianapolis and northwards, you guys are going to see some snowfall from this. But this system is not very long-lived. Saturday, it's shooting to the Atlantic in a hurry. And once again, we could see West Virginia and Virginia get inundated with snow showers like they are right now. Before it's all said and done, by the end of the weekend, this system makes its way off the Atlantic. But now we start to see some development once again in the south for more rain and possible severe weather. and I will go ahead and show the temperatures and see if that supports any kind of severe action. You see the Northeast is a little bit chilly than the rest of the country on that side, but as time moves on, we do start to get some mild air into the Northeast as we move on into the 27th of March, which is Tuesday, and I think I'll stop it right here. Going into Wednesday, we see another storm system taking aim at the Ohio, Mississippi Valley, and it looks to be more heavy rain in areas that's seen their fair share of moisture. So as I look into the future here, the 28th, GFS models are showing, look at this. Goodness, I hope this falls apart. But starting on Wednesday, actually late Tuesday, March 27th, you are going to get a heavy area of rain if you're along the Mississippi Valley, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri. It's just going to stay right over you guys and slowly move off to the east. And as you guys see right here, by the 28th, very heavy rain. We're talking 3 to 6 inches of rain, and it just stalls out. Thursday intensifies. Look at this. It doesn't move. Not until Friday does the system finally start to make its way towards the East Coast, which is all going to be rain for the East Coast. So this is very encouraging stuff here. By the end of March, we're looking at definitely springtime conditions, snow to the far north. It looks like the cold air tries to make its comeback here in the first week of April, believe it or not. But all that snow and cold air is going to stay in the northern plains in the northwestern part of the country. Meanwhile, the majority of the United States will see spring-like conditions. But this is going to be a big concern right here. And I'm going to tell you why this system is stalled out for as long as it is over here in the Mississippi Valley, as it starts to create here somewhere on the March 27th. And if you guys look out into the Atlantic, you'll see a high pressure system that's kind of just stays in place and kind of acts as a gear and just keeps this low pressure system in place for almost 2 days before it finally starts to make its way out. I mean, this thing starts up late Tuesday, actually early Tuesday. It starts to form, and it stays in the same general area all the way through late Thursday before it finally makes its exit. So we are definitely going to keep our eyes on this forecast. This area has already seen flooding, and I tell you what, I'm leaving it right here for now. Look at this intense amount of rain that's going to be along the Mississippi, guys. The Ohio River already seen its share of flooding. Fortunately, nothing as heavy, but you do see here on that earlier that Thursday that heavy rain does reach the Ohio Valley, and it could affect the Ohio River. So this is going to be our next newsmaker right here, folks, next week. Next Wednesday into Thursday, this is going to be the big system that everyone's going to be talking about. Let's hope it falls apart by then. But if I was a betting man, this does look promising as far as moisture in the south and southeast. Now, here's some other good news about this. If there's a silver lining to this weather maker right here, I went all the way back to Sunday, this Sunday. Texas, I know you guys need the rain. Next Monday, let's keep our fingers crossed. We should start to see some scattered shower activity into Tuesday. Most of Texas will have a shot at rain. Light chances, but they're chances. So let's hope that some of this moisture does make its way into Texas. And as we fast forward into Thursday, we see most of Texas, hell, even the northern part of Texas could see some snow showers as cold air tries to make its way throughout the country late March. As Old Man Winter, you know, he paid this month's rent, so he's technically got till April 1st, and he's trying to hang on. But we're definitely trying to evict this guy before the end of this month. So hopefully, Texas, you get some rain out of this system that's going to be kind of hanging around on the east coast of the United States. And after that, like I said, looking into the future cast, you know, it does look to be that we might get to see some calmer weather for the next 5 days after this storm leaves. So this is a good chance for this part of the United States to clean up from floods or even tornadic and severe thunderstorms. Because look, this is only the beginning of spring. We've already seen some massive hail in Texas and Alabama, and you know, GFS is already indicating some serious rain is going to fall on the 27th through the 29th. And again, a lot of it has to do, you've got a high pressure system here in the plains, you've got a high pressure system here in the Northeast, and as we move forward into that week, another high pressure system sets up here on the East Coast. So this low is technically wedged in between two high pressure systems, and this is how Harvey kind of stuck around in the Houston area for as long as it did, because it had a high pressure system on each side of it that kept it from going east or west. It just kind of stayed in one spot. So not comparing it to the hurricane, but I'm comparing it to the way it's stalling out on us here. So Mari, how's that chat going?
Oh goodness, we have so many great people. It took me a while to scroll up because when I was talking I lost track, and we're streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, which is Twitter, and a few other ones. So just monitoring the chat. Everyone's doing okay. A lot of people are asking, you know, where we live, where we want to be. You know, truthfully, it's hard to say. You know I don't want to be in New York, mainly because, you know, Buffalo has brutal winters to begin with anyway. I do plan on moving. I don't know exactly how life will unfold for me to move in a particular area. I have some ideas in mind, but, you know, I'm just sort of, I know I'll be where I need to be when the time comes, and that's what matters to me. You know, I feel I have time. I think looking into the future, it's not so much me, but setting my daughter up when she's an adult my age to be where she needs to be when, you know, I want to use an acronym, but when
I think too, you know, as far as when it's when the time comes, of course, you know, Mari and I, you know, there's no way we're gonna rough this out. I mean, this is, like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, with all the research that we've done, and especially the last couple of days with these paperworks that we're finding about a possible deep grand solar minimum looking like a very likely thing now, you know, when you start talking about glaciation and stuff like that, we're in a glacier zone, according to a lot of scientists. Now, we're not going to be alive to see that glacier zone form, but you better believe that it's like preheating an oven when you're cooking. You know, this is kind of the opposite here, but we're starting to cool off. This area, this zone is getting ready. Mari, one thing that impressed me about Buffalo this year, my first real winter in Buffalo, was the ice jam floods. And in the park this year, when we drove by, the boulders of ice that had floated up.
Videos of that?
I think we got some small footage, not a lot, but we went down there the day before. And you know what was crazy was that we went down there, we took footage of it, and like 2 days later, it was all gone. And very, very shocking. That's why we're flooding so much up here, all this ice melting. But to see these boulders come from the river and move as far as 100 yards into the park, and you look around, and I'm trying to give you a visual what the park looked like. If you guys have ever seen the movie Cocoon, where they had it's a movie from the 80s where they had these cocoons in the pool. It looked like cocoons like that all the way about as big as a football field on both sides of this creek. So it was very alarming to see the ice, and I looked at Mari. It's almost like, you know, the ice is starting to grow here. The glaciers are starting to grow because these giant ice boulders were just sitting in the park like they belonged there. And of course, once we got,
I'll post the video.
Yeah,
I'll dig it up. I'll just throw it up on the channel so you can see.
Most of you that are from a cold part of the United States, you probably witnessed this. This is my first year in the Northeast as far as winter. I've always been in the Southwest, Ohio, Kansas, or Tennessee. So this is definitely. And Mari reminds me how normal this winter was. Well, you know, I can't imagine. Well, I'm just saying, I can't imagine what above normal is going to be like.
I mean, definitely
slightly above, because normal's too much for me.
Nor'easter affected coastlines got like lambasted this winter. That's like, wow, never seen anything like that. You know, talking about where people are moving and living to, a lot of people are talking about living underground and stuff. I am very adamant against that because of all the flooding. I guess if you live in a drought area.
Well, and
you know,
flooding,
I'm not really comfortable with the whole living underground
but
thing.
we all follow John Casey's work, and you know, alongside with flooding, I'd be worried about earthquakes. I don't know how earthquake-proof bunkers are. You know,
and this is why I tell people, like, it's not easy to plan that far out. You have to sort of be on your toes and evolve as things progress. And the most important thing is to equip yourself with knowledge, survival skills, and, you know, means to survive with, you know, you got to sort of picture yourself without power. You have to picture yourself without a food source, and being able to provide your family with the basic necessities to get by. I mean, if you're prepared mentally and a knowledge base wise to do that, you know, people are portable. We can move wherever. We can migrate and move whatever. You know, planting roots down right now, I'm not comfortable doing that. I don't think there's enough information right now to do it. Certainly, I will not tell people to go dig a hole in the ground and live in it. I just won't do that, and you'll never hear that from this channel. We'll never do that.
all right, well, I think we're about finished here for tonight. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 7:30. We definitely are going to try to keep these daily, and we had some suggestions from people on Twitter earlier today, and also Mari has talked about this, but I think Fridays we're gonna, and tonight we ran a little long, we were almost at the 40-minute mark, but I think on Fridays 7:30 Eastern time, plan on doing an extended hangout with Jake and Mari on the Grand Solar Minimum channel, as we'll go over, you know, space news, weather news, global news, geological news, and have just a general chat with our subscribers and get people more involved with what we're doing here and get them in the discussion. We appreciate everybody who is tuned in right now on various live platforms simultaneously. Again, I want to thank Mari for all the hard work she's done to make that happen for us. And with that being said, guys, stay safe out there, and we'll talk soon.